So I'd like to begin today by wishing you all good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time of day it is for you. And we will begin today, as usual, with the prayers for going for refuge and rousing bodhicitta. So please recite these with faith and devotion, keeping the meaning and the words together as we recite them. So. Sanje chedan soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum je dage chenyen gi besanam gi dola penjer sanje drobar sho sanje chedan Soge chonam la chancho bardo dane chapsum che dage chenyen gi besanam gi dola penjir sanje drobar sho sange chedan soge chonam la Chancho bardo dane chapsum je dage chenyen gi besanam gi rola penjir sanje drobar sho until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha, by the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen tamje dewa tan dewe judan dembra jurje donga da donga ji judan ralwa jurje donga mebe dewa tamba tam minrawa jurje Yerin shata nitan rawe danyon chambola nebra yorche. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or hatred for those near or far. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta, the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And now please think to yourselves that we must bring all sentient beings who have all been intimately related to us and who have all helped us tremendously at some point in the past and actually are whom we're completely dependent upon now. We must do something to bring them lasting happiness. Now, lasting happiness is what we identify in Buddhism as Buddhahood. So we need to bring them to this Buddhahood. And in order to bring them to Buddhahood, we need to reach Buddhahood ourselves. And so think to yourselves that we are listening to the Dharma this today with the motivation of bringing all sentient beings to a state of lasting happiness. And thus listen with the motivation of bodhicitta. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as explained by the ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play. And the Treasury of Abhidharma, and of course the commentary as well, have 8 chapters. So we have completed the 6th chapter, and today we will begin the 7th chapter, the teachings on wisdom. So here, at this point, though, we had an interesting an interesting pair of questions come in over email this morning. And so I'll speak about those first. Actually, as I'm looking at the amount of material that we have left, there's no need to rush through it. My plan has been to finish this class by the end of the Tibetan 6th month, and we haven't even begun the Tibetan 6th month yet, so we've got plenty of time. So I'm not going to try to rush through material. I think during the teachings on the paths and individuals, at a few points I thought I have to be careful to go through things quickly enough so that we can finish, but I realize now that actually we've got plenty of time. So to address the questions, the first question is, when dull, middling, and sharp faculties are spoken of, how are faculties in this context defined? Could it be strictly the mind faculty among the 22, or perhaps they include many more as they become sharper? So when we talk about the faculties of individuals, if you remember, we talk about the difference between the followers of faith and dharma on the path of seeing, or they're following then they become the convinced through faith and attained by seeing on the path of meditation. Well, the main difference between them is their faculties. Are their faculties dull or sharp? When you have the different types of arhats, you've got the unshakable arhats, and their faculties are sharp. And then you've got sort of 5 gradations of dull faculties, which kind of go from dull to very dull. Well, not very dull, because if you're very dull, you're not going to get to the state of arhat. You've got to have a certain amount of acuity, sharpness to your faculties to do that. But, well, what are these faculties? So this is something that's not really specifically addressed in the 6th chapter. Something that is, however, addressed kind of, not in an entirely direct way. You have to think about it a little bit. It's addressed in the 2nd chapter, though. So in the 2nd chapter is the teaching on the faculties, and it actually has teachings on many other aspects of the composite phenomena. But the one it begins with, it's a teaching on the faculties. And in general, we teach because many of you have not heard the teachings we had in Namo Buddha, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here. With the faculties, in Buddhism, we say they're 22. So what do we mean by a faculty? Well, a faculty is something that gives you power or influence over something else. So when we say that a faculty gives you influence over something else, what we're saying is that it gives you the ability to do something. Now, in ancient India, there are many different presentations of what the different faculties are. Some of the non-Buddhist schools say that going, excreting things, those are different faculties, that there are different faculties. But in Buddhism, we say, no, they're not. In Buddhism, we talk about 22 faculties. Now, the first 5 of these are really easy to understand. They're the 5 sensory faculties. They give you power over sensory perception. So your eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body are your sensory faculties, and they're like the dominant condition that then allows you to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. So those are the dominant faculties. So the dominant conditions, or they're the faculties of those. We also have a mental faculty. And this is the support for the mind to arise. And what is the support for the mind to arise? Well, actually, it's the previous instant of mind. When you have a previous instance of mind, then the next moment can arise out of it. So it's like it's also sometimes called the concurrent immediate condition, but it's basically that previous instant of mind. That's the mental faculties. Then there are the male and female faculties. These are basically what differentiate the primary two genders, male and female. They're actually parts of the body faculty, but they're kind of brought out separately because they give you sort of that, the main faculty then determines, the secondary sexual characteristics and so forth. So those are two more faculties. And then we also have the faculty of life force. It's like what keeps you in the same likeness over the course of a single lifetime. Because, there's a certain similarity. Of course, when you look at, day one and you're kind of like a little worm, and then you look at fully grown and you're like this, youthful person, and then you look at age and you see that there's kind of like differences, but there's kind of a similarity the whole time. So we call that a likeness. And what keeps you in that is your life faculty. When your life faculty stops, then you move on to the next, basically. So those are the 9 basic faculties. And then in addition to that, we have the 5 faculties of feeling. So that you have the capability of feeling different things, the capability of feeling pain, capability of feeling pleasure, the capability to feel neutral things, the capability to feel mental pleasure or mental displeasure or unhappiness. So these are 5 different types of feelings that we would call the 5 faculties of the feelings. That gets us to 14, right? So what do they give us power of? They give us power over the sensations. And actually what happens is that because of the sensations, we then end up feeling, if it's pleasurable, then we feel attraction or attachment or desire. If it's unpleasant, then what do we feel? Well, we feel aversion or hatred or anger, displeasure. Well, displeasure is actually another one. Then we have the neutral, which is kind of blah, and that just sort of increases our delusion. And mental pleasure and mental unhappiness or displeasure also increase our attachments and angers. And so in other words, these 5 faculties, not only do they allow us to feel sensations, but they also, what do we say? They also give us the power over defiled worldly things of this world. So those are the 5 faculties of the feeling. So they're primarily, they get us involved in the samsaric world. It's because of our feelings that we then go, it feels good, we want more. It feels bad, we want to push it away. It's neutral and we just completely ignore, to put it really kind of in a very gross level. But then we also have the faculties that either allow us to develop the noble paths or that come about on the noble paths. Well, what are those? Well, we've got the 5 faculties that we were speaking about on the path of joining. What are they there? Faith, diligence, mindfulness, samadhi, and prajna. Those 5. Those 5 are the 5 pure faculties. Well, not really pure yet. They can be either pure or impure. They can either be defiled or undefiled. When we're ordinary individuals, then they are defiled because we haven't developed any undefiled cognition. They're still good. They're still virtuous, actually. They're among the virtuous mental factors. So those are those 5 of the 5 of faith and so forth. So that's another important category. And then the last, so that gets us up to 19. And now we've got the last 3. And these last 3 are what we call the 3 undefiled faculties or the 3 stainless faculties. And these are producing all-knowing, and having all-knowing. So what these are the faculties. These are kind of what gives us, what do they get? Their faculties, so they give us control over. So what do they, over something? So what do they give us control over? Well, producing all-knowing gives us control over the path of seeing. That's when it's there. So that's the one. That's a path of seeing. All-knowing is on the path of meditation. And then having all-knowing is on the path of no more learning after you've become an arhat. When any of the types of arhats, regular arhats, Pratyeka Buddhas, or Buddhas, and you have the having all-knowing. So these are the 3 stainless or the 3 undefiled faculties. So when we look at it, we've got 14 faculties that are necessarily defiled. Everything from the sensory faculties up to the faculties of the 5 feelings, including the male, female, and life and mind. Those are all defiled necessarily. Well, actually, mind is not necessarily defiled. 13 of them are defiled, necessarily defiled. Then we have the faculty of, then we have the 5 faculties of the faith and so forth, which can be increased and can lead us to the defiled. So they're defiled, but they can lead us there, or they can be undefiled when they're on like the paths of seeing and meditation and no more learning. And we also have the 3 stainless faculties, which are only undefiled. Now, those 3 stainless faculties, actually, if we think about it, the faculties are not all necessarily separate, substantial things. Some of them are, most of them are, but not all of them. For example, if we think about faith, diligence, mindfulness, samadhi, and prajna, those are all separate mental factors. And so they're each said to be their own kind of substance, their own substantially existent thing. When we look at like the sensory faculties, you've got the eye, which is not the physical thing of the eye. It's like this kind of clear form shaped like a flax flower. It's kind of like an energetic form or a clear form, they say. Or the shape of a birch bark in your ear and so forth. And so these are the different. It's not actually the physical thing that we can look at with a microscope or that a doctor would see when they look in your eyeball and your ear. It's actually kind of a pure form that's seen by those with higher faculties, but it's not necessarily seen by us ordinary individuals. But when we take a look at the other faculties, like, well, you know, the life force and the mind, those are kind of substantially sort of separate. But the male and female faculties are not separate from the body. So actually, it's like taking a part of the body and saying, okay, this is the male faculty or this is the female faculty, right? So generally, you have one or the other. Some people have both. Some people have neither. But generally, most people have one or the other, the male or female faculties, and they're actually kind of taken out from the bodily faculty. So how do we know this? Well, it's with the male and female faculties that you feel pleasure. They feel touch. They experience whichever sorts of, and I don't need to go there, I'm a monk, so I'm going to stop speaking about that. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So those are the male and female faculties. But they're not separate from the bodily faculty. So in a similar way, when we're talking about the 3 undefiled faculties of producing all-knowing, and having all-knowing, these 3 are actually not separate from the other faculties. They're like showing them at a specific stage. So what are they? Well, actually, they include 9 different faculties. They include the 5 of faith and so forth, which you would expect. They also include your mind, and they include the different feelings that you can have. So when you are on the paths, that means when you are in meditation on the paths, because when you are meditating on the paths, you're going to be on one of the 6 levels, either the undefiled, not enabled, the preparations for the first jhana, or the 4 levels of, actually any of the 9 levels really, or the 4 levels of formless, special dhyana, 4 levels of form, the special dhyana, or the 3 levels of formless. On any of those. And on those, you're going to have some sort of a feeling with your meditation. On like the undefiled, not enabled, it is a neutral feeling. But on the first jhana, it is joy. You have joy and pleasure. So it's actually both the physical pleasure and the bodily pleasure and also mental pleasure. On the second jhana, you only have the mental pleasure. And on the third jhana, you have a different type of pleasure that is kind of neither one nor the other, so we call it cognitive pleasure. But there's pleasure there. So there's pleasure, and there's neutral. And so it's the different types of pleasure, either the bodily pleasure, mental pleasure, or the neutral feeling. These are the types of feelings that are associated with the type levels of equipoise that you're on. So those also help to give you control. So what we're saying here is that at the time that you are on the path of seeing and meditation and no more learning, what gives you the control is like your mind, which is in equipoise, and then the feeling that is in the equipoise, because that's kind of like one of the main characteristics of each of the levels of dhyana. And the formless is neutral, but it's kind of the main characteristic. What feeling? How subtle is the feeling? And then so the mind and the three feelings, and then also the five faculties of faith and so forth. Those are what kind of give you control over how you're going through the path. For example, if we talk about faith, faith is like, if you have really, of course, once you get to that level of the three undefiled paths, you obviously have a lot of faith. But how strong is it? What type of faith is it? Is it faith? How did you get the faith? Is it a longing faith? Is it the sincere faith? Is it the faith through conviction? Which of these three different types of faith is it? So that's an interesting thing to have to look at. Maybe but essentially what we're saying is that your faith, that then, so basically on the path, your faith then leads to diligence, because the more faith you have, the more diligent you're going to be. And then the more diligent, then as you practice, you build your mindfulness. That develops samadhi, and that develops prajna, as we discussed the other day. So like faith is, as Nagarjuna said, faith is the basis of all virtuous qualities. It's the ground from which all virtuous qualities arise. So that is where we have the difference of the faculties, because people have different levels of faith. People have different levels of diligence and mindfulness and samadhi and so forth. Some of us have not even achieved the real samadhi of most of us in our traditions have not achieved the samadhi of the jhanas. We don't have that really effortless shamatha meditation where you can just rest as long as you like. In our traditions, like Gampopa, the early Kagyu forefather, before he met Milarepa, he had been a great bodhisattva. He was kind of predicted by the Buddha to be a great embodiment of a great bodhisattva who had spread the teachings of the king of samadhis. And so he came into this lifetime with high qualities. He had high faculties from the get-go. And when he finally started practicing, he was very quickly able to develop really strong shamatha meditation. So he was practicing his meditation, and he got to the point where he was able to rest pretty much as long as he wanted to. He would rest, and he rested like a day in shamatha meditation. And he thought to himself, well, I'm going to see, how long can I rest in meditation? And he sat down and he rested for 13 days. So, one-pointed resting in meditation for 13 days. When we look at the Mahamudra, the royal seal of Mahamudra by one of the Gyalwang Drukchen, I don't remember which one. In it, he talks about how these days, people don't even have enough shamatha to rest undistracted for as long as it takes an incense stick to burn. So, this is kind of the level that people have of resting one-pointedly. And these days, we're talking about like, oh, we can rest for 30 seconds. We think that's okay. Or we can maybe rest for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is like really good shamatha meditation, right? But when Gampopa first went to go see Milarepa, Milarepa said to him, and he said to Milarepa, well, I can rest in shamatha meditation for 13 days. And Milarepa said, that doesn't do any good. All that's going to do is lead you to rebirth in the formless realm. That's no good. So in our tradition, we don't emphasize the practice of the dhyanas and the practice of the formless realms, which are essentially, they are the strong states of shamatha meditation. Now, in the dhyana realms, the dhyana meditations, as we spoke about the other day, they do give you a lot of control. There's a lot of ability for insight in those as well. In the formless meditation, not as much. But still, at least in our Karma Kagyu tradition, we don't practice the dhyanas. And I don't think that the other Tibetan traditions teach them directly that frequently either. So this is what we're talking about. Essentially, when we're talking about the faculties that differentiate, well, which level of individual are you on? You're looking at, well, what level of, first of all, faith, diligence, mindfulness, samadhi, and prajna you have. And these are all things that we can develop. And they, of course, generally start from thinking about faith. So what does faith come from? Well, you start kind of by thinking about the qualities of the three jewels. What are the qualities of the Buddha? Why is the Buddha such a wonderful being? Why do we actually follow the Buddha? Why do we even bother? If you think about that, think about the reasons, the quality of the Buddha, what the Buddha managed to do. When he taught the Dharma, he taught all the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma in a short time, in the space of, well, how long was he teaching on this earth? Maybe 45 years. I mean, he taught so many different teachings that now in Tibetan, we have preserved in 108 volumes, and we know that there are many teachings that were lost that are not included in those 108 volumes. So he taught a whole lot, and but mainly he taught different ways for different beings that bring them all along the path that is appropriate for each of them and knows their path. So you think about that, and you understand that, and that kind of gives you faith. When you really sit down and think about it, what it must have been like for the Buddha to sit down under the Bodhi tree, achieve perfect enlightenment, and see how to benefit all sentient beings. That's like amazing. So you think about the qualities of the Buddha. You think about the qualities of the Dharma. Without the Dharma, where would we be? I mean, this means that we also have to really look at the natures of our own lives, the facts that our lives are short. 80 years, 90 years might seem like a long lifetime, but frankly, if you live to 80, the chances of being able to do too much in the last decade of your life it's hard. The older we get, the harder it is to do things. We have to be careful, we have to use the time that we have this short lifetime. And we don't even know that we're going to make it to 80 if we aren't already there. Tomorrow could be your 80th birthday, and there's still no guarantee that you're going to get to it. Tomorrow could be your 55th birthday, and there's no guarantee you'll get to it. It could even be your 3rd birthday, and there's no guarantee. I mean, in the past year, we can see that millions of people who otherwise wouldn't have died of the coronavirus. Here in Western Canada, there were, I think, in the province of British Columbia, there were 500 excess deaths from the heat over the last week. So those are people who just, conditions were wrong, and life is perishable, it goes away. So we need something that's going to help us, and we have to have the feeling that we need to use it, we need to bring ourselves benefit, and that is the Dharma. That's the only thing that's going to benefit us at the time of death. Any other worldly things that we have are going to help us until we get to death, but after that, they're not going to be of much use at all. The only thing that we are going to take with us is the karma that we have done. And the only way we can really make sure that we have good karma is by practicing true Dharma. So that is the Dharma. And then the Sangha is those group of individuals who can help us, guide us on the path. So these are the three jewels, thinking about them, thinking about the faith, thinking about them with faith, thinking about the qualities. If there were not a monastic Sangha, the teachings would not have lasted nearly as long as they did. If it weren't for monks and nuns who devote their lives to studying and studying, contemplating, and listening on the teachings, there would be no teachings for anyone. Now, of course, many lay people also practice, and this is excellent. But what is it that has kept the continuity of the teachings over the time? It's been that basis of preserving them. It's founded primarily on the monastic Sangha. For example, nowadays in the Tibetan traditions, we have all the teachings of the Terma, we have the teachings of the pith instructions of many different lineages and so forth. And at this point, the main reason why those are still with us is because the monastics of the 19th century assembled, and in particular, Jamgon Kongtrul Lodrö Tai, at the sort of encouragement of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, compiled them into the 5 great treasuries of the Tibetan tradition that preserved all of these instructions. And then they've been preserved. I mean, of course, the empowerments are given to everyone. The instructions are given to everyone, but where they're preserved primarily is in the monastic Sangha. And so this is a really important function of the monastic Sangha that we need to keep in mind. Now, then there also is the noble Sangha, those bodhisattvas. In the Mahayana, we talk about bodhisattvas and so forth, who can really guide us down the path. In the great vehicle tradition, we talk about the noble Sangha as being those beings who have developed the path, the 4 noble truths and so forth in their beings. And so these are the Sangha, these are beings. Like when you think about those people, the noble Sangha who have gone through the path and achieved realization, we look where we are, it's like, wow, that is just amazing that they've got there. It's that they can still do it. And people are still doing it. People are still achieving levels of realization in all of the different Buddhist traditions. It's still happening to this day. And we can do it too. And this is just really inspiring to see that. And then we've, of course, also got kind of all of our regular companions on the path. And so these days we kind of call everyone in English, not in other languages, well, maybe in other European languages, but not in the Asian languages. We also call what do we say, our lay people who are also practicing Buddhism and who help and support us on the path, we also call them Sangha. So like and part of that is I think we all like to feel like we belong and so forth, and it's good. And also our friends, our Dharma friends, give us a lot of support and help on the path. And so this is also an important function that all the people around us play. We all support each other and help each other along the path if we're doing it properly. Or if we are all fighting amongst each other and all worrying about and arguing over that melody is not correct, you should do it this way. If we're arguing over those things, we're not helping anyone, least of all ourselves, but we're especially harming the teachings, because people are going to come into a Dharma center and see people arguing over stupid things like which melody is right. And that's going to turn people off, and it's actually not good for Buddhism. So we all have to be like really careful to see either we are actual members of the Sangha, or we're kind of like what we call in English the Sangha, but we all have this part to play. And if we're not like the traditional definition of the Sangha, then we need to do what we can to become a traditional member of the Sangha, which would mean to become realized, to achieve realization, so that we can actually become the jewel of the Sangha ourselves. So this is, and so when we think, and so those are the 3 jewels, and we should, and as practitioners on the individual level, we need to have faith in the 3 jewels and confidence that the 3 jewels can take us all the way to realization, and then through the stages of meditation to liberation and omniscience. And so that's what we need. So we have faith in that. And then as we have faith and we want to do this ourselves, you see people who have achieved experience and realization realize, hey, they started out where I am now. And then you want to do it. That's wanting to do it. And then you're diligent about it. You get excited about it. You see people who have results. You even see people have temporary results, and you get excited about it. Or you do something that gives you a temporary result and you feel excited about it. So that makes you more diligent. And that then increases your mindfulness, and then your samadhi, and then your prajna develops even further out of that. We can also engage in listening, contemplating, and meditating, and so forth. And that gives us and so all of these, when you put it all together, they're giving us control over our path, because these are all things that we can influence. We can meditate on thinking about the qualities of the 3 jewels in order to increase faith. We can study and contemplate to increase our prajna. We can practice meditation in order to develop samadhi and mindfulness. And we can, of course, develop diligence. So all of these things that can give us control. And as we do that, then gradually we'll also develop the faculties of the feelings that are on the different levels of samadhi and so forth. And so in this way, we can develop those pure, undefiled faculties ourselves. And then through the strength of those, we can follow the path. So it's in our hands. So that's kind of an overview of the faculties, with like especially on the thinking about the three undefiled faculties. So really, we have the 5 of faith and so forth, and the 3 undefiled faculties. The 3 undefiled faculties are basically the 5 of faith and so forth, with a few other feelings and the mind faculty added. You put them all together and you call them faculties. So where can we start? It's by developing the 5 faculties of faith and so forth. Faith. Okay, so that was the first question about the faculties. And then the second question was, to read it goes, the second question may be outside the topic of the class. Well, we're going to talk about it at least in brief anyways. Chapter 18 and 19 of the Tapo Targyan, or there are 2 translations of the title. The well-known one is the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. A more accurate, whatever that means, accurate one is the Ornament of Precious Realization. So they generally present the paths and levels of the Mahayana. While chapter 19, the levels must be exclusively Mahayana, it seems that the presentation of the 5 paths in chapter 18 is taught from the view of the foundation vehicle. But it may be that the Mahayana uses the same terms with somewhat different meanings as the 5 paths in Mahayana. So the 5 paths in Mahayana take some 3 immeasurable eons instead of the 7 lifetimes in desire once you get to stream mentor as presented in the treasury. So this may be opening a can of worms that may become clear only if I study. So I am in more detail at some point. So here, what we're basically, when we talk about the presentations of the paths and levels, there are different levels of these presentations, and they're different in each of the different schools. And there are differences between the foundation vehicle and the Mahayana. Even within the foundation vehicle, there may well be differences between, say, the Great Exposition and the Theravada when it comes down to the details. But generally, in the northern Buddhist traditions, we can say that there is the presentation of the paths and levels in the sutras and the presentation of the paths and levels in the tantras, kind of generally breaking them down. In the tantras, it's a little bit different. It's kind of taking the sutras as kind of like the teachings of the sutras as kind of like an analogy, using an analogy as a way to kind of understand better the pure nature of all of yourself and all sentient beings. Within the sutra tradition, we have the foundation and the foundation vehicle and the Mahayanas. And the foundation vehicle, that's in what's preserved in the Tibetan tradition, is primarily the teachings of the Great Exposition. And so in the Great Exposition, we've just been through this presentation of the 5 paths. So likewise, when we see the 5 paths in the Mahayana, they're the same 5 paths by name: accumulation, joining, seeing, meditation, and no more learning. These are the same names. But the way you progress through the paths is different in the 2. And the main reason they're different is that you have a different aim. In the Mahayana, what is your goal? It's to become a Buddhahood, so to reach Buddhahood so you can eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings, free all sentient beings from birth, aging, sickness, and death, and the other types of suffering. In the foundation vehicle, the aim is to achieve the level of arhatship, because it's hard enough to do that for oneself, and you can't really do it for other sentient beings unless you're some extraordinary being like the Bodhisattva. I mean, they allow in the foundation vehicle, of course, that there are Bodhisattvas and there are Buddhas, but they don't emphasize how is it that you get to the level of Buddhahood. There are a few little teasing hints in the Treasury of Abhidharma about it, but not a whole lot. There's an interesting passage in the 4th chapter in the auto commentary. It's not even in most of the other commentaries, but there is an interesting passage about that in the 4th chapter. So they don't really, so the main emphasis there is on achieving the state of Arhat. And so since the aims are different, you've got 2 major differences between the 2. Well, the first is the aim, and then what follows on that is, because the aim is different, what you have to eliminate to achieve them is different. So in order to become an arhat, all you have to eliminate, sounds like something small. All you have to eliminate are the afflictions. It's not that that's an easy task or that there are too few of them, but that's what you have to eliminate, the afflictions. And so this is what we spoke about in terms of the discards of seeing and the discards of meditation. They're all afflictions, the greed, hatred, anger, greed, hatred, delusion, pride, doubt, and the 5 types of view. So those are, basically 6 types of afflictions. So those are what you have to eliminate through the paths of seeing and meditation. And once they're completely gone for all 3 realms, then you are set. You're an arhat. But Buddhahood is there's something different that you have to eliminate. You have to eliminate what we call the cognitive obscurations. Now, this is a term that I don't know whether it does not appear at all in the Great Exposition, or if it is just a very rare term. It is certainly not emphasized in the Treasury of Abhidharma. So in the Mahayana tradition, instead of trying to eliminate the afflictions alone, you're trying to eliminate your cognitive obscurations, which are basically the mistakes of dualistic thinking, and that prevent you from seeing the empty nature of all phenomena. So you're trying to overcome your habits of dualistic thought. So these cognitive obscurations are eliminated in stages as you reach the beginning of each of the bodhisattva levels. Then you eliminate another kind of level of these cognitive obscurations. So that the path of seeing is the beginning of the first bodhisattva level, or the first bodhisattva bhumi. It's the beginning. It's not the whole thing. It's the beginning of that stage. The very first, moment, or the first 16 moments. There's some debate over that. It's that first stage of the path of seeing. And then the rest of the path of seeing is getting ready to go up the next hump to achieve this, to achieve the second level, and so forth. And so there, the primary focus is not to eliminate the afflictions. The primary focus is to eliminate the cognitive obscurations. And then when the cognitive obscurations are eliminated, the afflictions naturally are also eliminated. So the emphasis is different in the path of what you're doing. And so therefore the descriptions of the path have to necessarily be somewhat different. However, at the same time as the goal is different and the methods and the descriptions are different, at the same time, they also have to make sure that they're explaining the same things that are explained in the Great Exposition. And so when we get to like the path of seeing in the Mahayana, you have the descriptions of the 16 moments of clear realization in the Mahayana, just as in the Great Exposition. So we've been through all these 16 moments of the clear realization. So now when you go and you study the Ornament of Clear Realization by Maitreya or other similar texts, generally we study the Ornament of Clear Realization, you will also go through those in detail from the Mahayana perspective. The descriptions are slightly different, but the foundation is the same. You still have got the Dharma forbearance, Dharma knowing, subsequent forbearance, and subsequent knowing for each of the 4 noble truths for 16 moments of clear realization in the Mahayana. But again, the focus of the meditation is different. And then another difference is that in many of the Mahayana presentations, there's a little bit of debate about this, so it's not all, but in many of them, many of the Mahayana traditions, what is said is that actually, instead of being the 16 moments of clear realization, it's actually one moment of seeing emptiness. That one moment, the very first moment at the beginning of the path of, beginning of the first level of first bodhisattva level, is the path of seeing. It's a moment long, one moment as opposed to 16. And you explain it as 16 in order to basically, what do we say? Either kind of an analogy for the realization that you have, or a way to kind of fit in with the general Buddhist traditions, because these 16 moments are taught in the sutras. So how do you then bring them together with the Mahayana view that you're actually seeing emptiness fully at that moment? Well, that's how you do it. So that's a lot of discussion about that. So there are some Mahayana presentations that say the 16 moments increasing realization, others that say that that first moment is the moment of realization. And this debate is discussed more in the teachings in the Ornament of Clear Realization. And then when we're talking about the individuals, as I mentioned when we were speaking about the leapers and half leapers and so forth, all the different types of non-returners, these are also used as like analogies for different types of bodhisattvas. So you go and you study them here in the great exposition tradition, and then when you come to them later in the when you later study the Ornament of Clear Realization, then you have like some idea of what actually they're comparing bodhisattvas to. What is the basis for the comparison? So that's basically the relationship between the two. We've got the great exposition and the Mahayana. And so the Mahayana needs to deal with all the issues that are brought up in the foundation vehicle, or otherwise people will say, hey, you're not complete. You forgot to talk about the 16 moments. You're not complete. You forgot to talk about the different types of non-returners. Well, so that's how it goes in the sutra tradition. So that's primarily talking about the meditations of the sutra level. Then when you get to the Tantra, actually, Tantra is really developing the same qualities or uncovering the same qualities that are talked about in the sutra, taking it from a very different perspective. So when we talk about the qualities of the paths, or the essence of the path being the 37 levels of the 37 factors of enlightenment, these are actually all embodied in the tantric deities and the tantric and the symbolized in the different mandalas and so forth. And so that explanation is given in more detail when you get to the tantras. So in other words, you might be thinking to yourselves, when we study all this stuff, that like, what is this? I'm practicing tantra. It's not useful. I don't need to know about that. I just need to have pride of the deity. Well, what are you having pride in? What is the deity? What is the pride of the deity? What are the qualities of the deity? These 37 factors. In one way of looking at it, right? So we have to know this. If you don't really, there's an interesting book that Dzongchen Khyentse Rinpoche just wrote and released. So I took a look at it over the last few days, and he speaks a lot about how you have to have a real understanding of the great exposition if you're going to be able to develop an understanding of the Tantra. You have to understand this. You have to have an understanding of the Mahayana Sutra presentations if you're going to have an understanding of the Tantra. So it's really important. Not only do you have to have an understanding for an intellectual understanding, you also have to develop the qualities in yourself of these foundation vehicles. If you don't have the qualities of the foundation vehicle, then how are you going to achieve the qualities of the great vehicle, let alone the qualities of Tantra? For example, when you think about the foundation vehicle, what is the main thing that distinguishes the foundation vehicle? It's the motivation of revulsion with samsara, the wish for emancipation from samsara. Usually we translate this as, often we translate it as renunciation. The actual word means a wish for emancipation, wanting to free yourself. If we don't actually have a wish to free ourselves, how can we have a wish to want to free others? If all you want to do is make people happy, then you could just go to Starbucks and buy them all coffee. Well, that's not going to make everyone happy. Some people you're going to have to buy chai, but you wouldn't buy them Starbucks chai because it's no good. Anyways. So we have to have the basis, and we have to study the basis. So that is what we've been looking at in this class. So that was kind of a digression, but it's okay. So we have now come to the, what do we say? Seventh area, the teachings on wisdom. That's where we're at. So the seventh area, the teachings on wisdom. And so we'll begin the text of the chapter. So on my mind's, on the seventh area, teachings on wisdom. So this is Wangchuk Dorje's verses in introduction. On my mind's clean white dukula cloth, the many hues of all dharmas I distinguish clearly are so bright. If at that time, if I do not forget my glorious Lama, youthful Manju, then how could I wander in samsara? The Ganges current explanations of the paths of three baskets washes away all stains of faulty views. This is the cleanser I release. So here, the one word you probably don't know is the Sanskrit word dukula, which refers to a type of really pure cloth that is clear on the outside, clear on the inside. It's like a divine fabric. And so it's clear, so you can see everything clearly. It's like the mind is like, has that clear quality. And so you can see the many, so Wangchuk Dorje is talking about seeing the many hues of all dharmas. So how is it that Wangchuk Dorje could see them? It's because of his glorious Lama, his glorious Guru. It's because of the Lama, because of the Guru, because of the spiritual friend that we're able to develop our prajna and then distinguish which dharmas are which, what is what. So, and he's telling his guru, youthful Manju, which is like comparing. Now, I'm not sure if he's speaking about Kuntruk Bang or if he's speaking about the fifth Shamar Kuntruk Yenlak, or if he's speaking about Namgyal Drakpa. He could be speaking about both. And if I don't remember that guru, then how could I wander in samsara? He's probably talking about Kuntruk Yenlak here, Shamar Kuntruk Yenlak. So the Ganges current, with the explanations of the paths of three baskets, washes away all the stains of faulty views. So this, with the teachings here in the Abhidharma, are teachings that clear us, that cleanse us of these stains. And so here, the seventh area, the teacher's teachings on wisdom, has an explanation of the text of the area and a presentation of the area's name. The explanation of the text of the area has 4 topics: the knowings, the explanation of possession, how the knowings are attained, and the qualities of the knowing. So the knowing, so what we're talking about here, we're talking about wisdom and the different types of knowing that you can have. Now, it's not just these types of knowing, this being the Abhidharma, the presentation has to be as complete as possible. So they're talking about different types of knowing, from the relative knowing that even ordinary sentient beings to the knowing that enlightened beings can have. Now, the word for knowing here in Sanskrit is jnana. So jnana is the word that we have different translations for it in the Mahayana. Many people translate it, probably more frequently it's translated as primordial wisdom. Some people translate it as wisdom. I usually translate it as wisdom itself, but I won't get into that. We don't need to quibble about translations so much right now. But in the topic, when we're talking about the jnana in this context, we're talking about every sort of knowing, from ordinary sentient beings knowing or knowledge up to arhats and Buddhas. So what is the nature of these and how can we distinguish this? It's not really talking so much about what you know, but it's talking about like well, it is kind of talking about it. It's not talking about what you know in specifics. It's talking about them in terms of categories, which is, of course, how things go in the Abhidharma. So we've got 10, so we've got different types of knowings. And we've actually been talking about different types of knowings as the class has gone by. In fact, in the well, let me go a little bit further in the text. There's a part where Wangchuk Dorje speaks about this. So I'll move there. So we'll go back to the text. So with the knowings, there are the 3 topics. There's the distinctions between forbearances, knowings, and views. So this is the topic that we had a question on last week that I deferred until this week. So identifying the 10 knowings and examining the distinctions among the knowings. So we have the distinctions between forbearances, knowings, and views, and there are 2 points. So we're going to talk about the defiled. We have undefiled and defiled. So the reason that this topic comes up, and before I read the root, I'm going to go down to the first paragraph of Wangchuk Dorje's commentary here. It says here, in the Abhidharma, the terms forbearance, knowing, correct view, and right knowing all appear. Is there anything that is a forbearance but not a knowing, or right knowing but not a view? So we've had these terms have come up. So we've got 4 terms, right? We've got forbearance, as in the Dharma forbearance of suffering, the subsequent forbearance of suffering, Dharma forbearance of origin, subsequent forbearance of origin, and so forth, up each of the 4 paths, or each of the 4 truths, right? So are those four forbearances, are they considered knowing? Are they the same? Are they different? What's the distinction between the two is what we're saying. Or is there anything that, but we also talked about right knowing. Well, is right knowing a view? So what are we talking about here? Well, we've got these four characteristics that have been that were discussed in this 6th chapter. So the forbearances, they were spoken about when we were teaching about talking about the 16 moments of clear realization. In verse 25, it says, "From the supreme of worldly dharmas comes undefiled dharma forbearance." So that's the forbearance. That's what we mean here. The 8 forbearances on the path of seeing. And then the knowings, the teachings on that comes right after that. It says of suffering of desire, from which arises dharma knowing of just that itself. So the forbearances lead to knowing. So what is knowing? What is forbearance? What is the distinction between the two? Then later in the chapter, we spoke about the enlightenment as knowing extinction and knowing extinction and non-arising. So what is that? Is it right view? We also spoke about right knowing as an arhat having right knowing. Like the right knowing is on the the path of no more learning, but it's not on the paths of the learners. So this is discussed in verse 76, where it says, enlightenment as taught is knowing. It's right knowing. So that's what we mean by right knowing when we're speaking about it in the sutras. Yandape shepa. So what do we mean by these things? So we've got these 4 terms: forbearance, knowing, right knowing, and a view. So like, is right knowing necessarily knowing? Is our knowings necessarily views? Is forbearance knowing? Is it a view? What's the relation? So the root text in here reads, stainless forbearances aren't knowing. Minds of extinction and non-arising are not views. The other noble minds than those are both. So we've got the stainless forbearances. What are the stainless forbearances? They are the 4 dharma forbearances, one for each truth, and the 4 subsequent forbearances, one for each truth. So those 8 moments on the path of clear realization. So those are not knowing. Now we'll get to the reason in a moment when we go through the commentary. The main reason is that they're not yet recognition of the view. And then the minds of extinction and non-arising are not views. Well, those are knowing, but they're not views. And then the other noble minds, this means like the dharma knowing and subsequent knowing, either on the path of seeing or on the path of meditation, are both. They are both views and knowing. So here we have to, in order to understand this, we have to understand, well, what makes a forbearance and not a knowing? What makes a knowing into knowing? And then what's the difference between knowing and view? So what are these 3 different things? So to read the commentary, so at the bottom of the page it says, the 8 stainless forbearances of the path of seeing are views, but not knowing. So why is that? It is because knowing is inherently recognition. So if you remember, on the path of seeing, what happens? You've got the afflictions right here, and then you have the dharma forbearance of knowing. That's that wisdom that arises, and at that point, there's not recognition. You're seeing the truth, and the kernels that it discards are still there. They haven't left yet. They don't leave until as it says later. It says the kernels are discarded as the path ceases. Right. So it's when the path of no obstacle ceases that all of the kernels also cease. Now, one of those kernels is what? Doubt. So there's still doubt in that moment of forbearance. You've got the wisdom, but the doubt hasn't left completely. It can't remain long because wisdom and ignorance are basically exclusive of coexistence. They can't live together. So the forbearances are paths of no obstacles. So at that point, the kernels they discard have not been abandoned, and there is doubt with regard to their object. So you've still got there, the forbearances are looking at, it's like you have the forbearance of the dharma forbearance of knowing of the truth of suffering. So it's looking at the truth of suffering, and at that point, while it's there, there's still some doubt that also focuses on the truth of suffering. And then that path at the end of that moment, which is like a really short period of time, goes away. And then you have knowing. So the Dharma forbearances and the subsequent forbearances, there's a bit of doubt, so they're not yet knowing. You're not 100% certain. You're seeing, and then the next moment you say, and that's knowing. So that seeing there is like the forbearance, but there's still doubt. Because they are inherently right thought, they are view. So in other words, when you're engaging when the Dharma forbearances are looking, they're also considering and knowing, or considering, they're also considering what they're seeing. So they have an aspect of being thought or consideration. In particular, we're talking about the mental factor of consideration. And so so because they have that and it's right thought, then they are view. Now, so they are view and they're forbearances and they're right thought, but they are not knowing. So does that mean that they're just not mind? I mean, you'd think mind is knowing. If you don't know, how can it be mind? So what does that mean? So saying that they are not knowing does not mean that they are not cognition, but means that they are not included among the 10 knowings. So here we have to kind of distinguish between knowing and cognition. It's like there's doubt, so it's not really knowing. You aren't certain yet, right? So it's a forbearance, but not a knowing. But it's still cognition. So that's the forbearances. So although the undefiled forbearances are views, but not knowing, in contrast, the minds or knowings of extinction and non-arising have no right thought and do not have the intention to thoroughly investigate, so they are knowings, but not views. So we're talking about the mind here. We're speaking about the minds of extinction and non-arising. This means enlightenment, right? The definition of enlightenment is that it's the mind of non-arising, of extinction and non-arising. So they have no right thought. That means that they're no longer considering anything. They're not thinking about anything. There's no need to consider everything because everything has already been known. No longer any need to consider. So they're not right thought. So they're not a view. And they have no intention to thoroughly investigate, because a view, it's like with a view, you're kind of thinking about something and you want to know about it. So you have a view, kind of an understanding that you're using as the basis for your investigation. But you've already investigated everything. You've known it all, and you know that there's nothing more to know. So they're not views. So they are knowing, but they are not forbearances. They are not views. In particular, the not views. In general, this is part of the question that came up last week. The forbearances are really, that term is used primarily, if not exclusively. I'm not going to say definitely exclusively, because it could be in some place that I haven't read, but they're generally talking about those 8 moments on the path of seeing, those 8 moments of clear realization, Dharma knowing and Dharma forbearance and subsequent forbearance. After that, the characteristic of it given here is that with the forbearance, you still have a little bit of doubt. After you've gone through the entire path of seeing, there's no more doubt. So then there's no more forbearance. From then on, it's either Dharma knowing or subsequent knowing. So you have those forbearances and you have the knowing of extinction and non-arising. So that's kind of the beginning and the end, beginning point and ending point of the Noble Paths. So what do you have in the middle? The undefiled full knowing or prajna of other noble minds than those. And that those means the undefiled forbearances and the knowings of extinctions and non-arising are both view and knowing, because they are right consideration, which is thought, and complete recognition. So they have discarded doubt. So you have seen the 4 truths in full in the path of seeing. You no longer have any doubt. So they're not forbearances. And they are views because they have that right consideration or that right thought. So what are these moments of undefiled prajna or undefiled full knowing? This means the prajna that is in the Dharma knowing, subsequent knowing in the path of seeing, and also those same knowings on the path of meditation. So basically on the path of meditation, when you are in meditative equipoise, when you are doing your meditation practice, in other words, and when you're actually meditating as opposed to being distracted in your meditation practice, those are all knowing, and they're all either Dharma knowing or subsequent knowing. So those are the undefiled cognitions. Then we also have the defiled. So others are knowing, 6 are views as well. So those which are other than the undefiled, that is, all that are defiled, worldly, full knowing, that is prajna, are knowing. So when you have prajna, then it can be knowing. And if you have the distinction, if you have something that is distinguishing dharma from non-dharma, right from wrong, should I do, should I not do, that is prajna. This is knowing that can actually distinguish it, right? This relative knowing does not have to be solely free of doubt. So this is different than the undefiled knowing. So it's like, it can mean the relative knowing can either mean that knowing of relative things as an ordinary being before you achieve the noble paths, or for noble beings who are in their post-meditation. And it does, so for the ordinary beings, it's not free of doubt because we still haven't seen the truths and we haven't abandoned the kernel of doubt, so we still have it. So 6 of these, so 6 of types, 6 of what we mean are 6 of these, I mean 6 of these different types of prajna include personality and the rest of the 5 views, as well as the correct worldly view, are not only knowing, they're views as well. So with the relative knowing, you can have, what do we say? You have different types of knowing, and some of them are views. So when you have the correct worldly view, what is the correct worldly view? It is the view that there's karmic cause and result, that there are past and future lives, that if you practice virtue, that will lead to good results in the future. If you engage in misdeeds, it'll bring suffering in the future. So that's the correct worldly view. Plus, personality view and the rest of the 5 views. That means personality, extreme, wrong, overesteeming view and discipline, and overesteeming causal. Overesteeming view and discipline and overesteeming the view. So those 5. Overesteeming austerity and discipline and overesteeming view. So those are the 5 views that are kernels plus the correct worldly views. So one of these is good, 5 are bad. But there are 6 views. Then other sorts of the relative views are, what do we say? They are, or so other types of relative knowings, like when you know a blanket, or you know a jug, or something like that. That is relative knowing. So, or if someone says, cook, or do, or something like that, then that is like, you know it, then that is relative knowing. So in particular, some full knowings, that is some instances of prajna of the precursors to clear realization, are all 3. In other words, they are views, they are knowing, and they are also forbearances compatible with seeing the truth. So that's on the path of training. So when you see the term precursors to clear realization, or in Tibetan Nyeche Chatun, the precursors to clear realization, that means the path of joining. And so some, but not all instances of prajna, they're going to be relative knowing, right? They're defiled, they're relative knowing, but they're compatible with seeing the truth. So they're forbearance, they're correct worldly view, so they're view, and they're knowing. So other worldly knowings are knowing but not view. So if you know blanket, if you know jug, that is not a view, but it is knowing. So I think that that is enough for us right now. We've got this basic distinction, and let's just go over the distinction. We've got forbearances, knowings, and views are the basic distinctions we're talking about. So forbearances still have a little bit of doubt. So that's why they're only on the path of seeing, right? They haven't, they on the path of seeing, the undefiled arise at the same time as the arises, and it coexists for that brief moment with the afflictions it discards, and then once they're gone, then there's no more doubt with regard to that. So once you've gone through the whole path, the whole set of the 16 moments, when you get to the 16th moment, then there is no more doubt. So after that point, there are no more forbearances. Then views are when you have prajna that is kind of investigating and wanting to know things. So that makes something into a view. And then then when you have the knowing, that just means that you're like knowing it. You're free of doubt. You just know something. So here, just a kind of a translation comment. When I was kind of looking at, when I was working on this years ago, I debated a lot about what to say for this word jnana, the Sanskrit word jnana. And should I say wisdom? Should I say, well, you can't really say wisdom because it includes a lot of defiled knowings. And then should I say knowledge or should I say knowing? And at that time, I made the decision I'd say knowing because, well, it's a little bit more organic feeling. Strange reason. Maybe that's just my own bias. But the other point is that when you talk about knowledge, sometimes you're also talking about knowledge can refer to the knowing, the cognition itself, or it can refer to what you know, an area of knowledge. So it often talks about the topic. So I chose the word knowing instead, kind of making a verbal noun. It's maybe not the most common of things, but at any rate, that's kind of explaining what we mean by knowing. It's the cognition that knows something else. And so really knowing something. So that is the text of the chapter that we are, or that is the beginning of the text of this chapter. So we will continue with this tomorrow. So we had a little bit of digression today, and we have one thing that is not a question. Oh, excuse me. So there's a question that came up about the teachings of the emptiness or voidness of ego in the Hinayana and the teachings of the emptiness of everything in the Mahayana. Can you address this? So here what we're talking about is the, in the Mahayana and in the foundation vehicle, we talk about emptiness. We talk about empty. What is the difference in the understanding of emptiness between the Mahayana and the foundation vehicle? So this comes up a little bit later when we're in the text, but to go over it a bit now, when in the foundation vehicle, when we're talking about the four aspects of the truth of suffering, we've got four: impermanence, suffering, empty, and selfless. And I've been repeating these over again, so you probably are getting, hopefully they're drilling further and further into your consciousness. So you've got empty and selfless. So first we have to understand what is the difference between the two. So selflessness means that when you look at the five aggregates of your continuum, you cannot see a permanent, singular, autonomous self. There's no self. There's no soul, no Atman, no self, no single permanent self. So that's selflessness. And when we talk about the aspect of emptiness, it's also empty. That means that not only is there no me, that is no self, there is no mine. The external things are empty of being mine. You cannot grasp at something else as being mine. So that's what we talk about as being empty and selfless in the Great Exposition. Primarily, selflessness primarily is speaking about empty of me. There's no me. And selfless is saying that there's no mine. Like if you say a watch, glasses, my glasses are not mine. Okay, so that's empty and selfless in the foundation vehicle. Then when we get to the Mahayana, well, it takes again a deeper view, and there are many different levels of explanation of it in the Mahayana, frankly. Selflessness, we talk about selflessness, we divide it into two. We talk about the selflessness of individuals and the selflessness of phenomena. So the selflessness of individuals is to look at the aggregates of the continuum and realize that there is no individual self there. So this is like in the way of the Bodhisattva, the hair and teeth and nails aren't me, and so forth, looking at everything. Your mind is not me. The six consciousnesses are not me. This is not me. There is no me. This is similar, if not the same. I'm not going to say the same. I'm going to say similar right now, but it's probably basically the same. The differences would be subtle. There's no self. When you're talking about emptiness, well, it's not just that external phenomena are empty of being mine, but they're also empty of any existence of their own. They do not appear. They do not appear separately, or they're not. They don't have their own independent existence. When you look at the aggregates, if you're talking, since we're in the Abhidharma, we might as well look at it on this level. You think about the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. With the physical aggregates, you can break them down and down until you get to what the Great Exposition calls the partless atoms: form, feeling, sound, scent, earth, water, fire, and air, the 8 basic types of atoms that form, that must be present in all material things, or any of the other types of atoms that could also be present. But you've got these basic atoms. When you break them apart, I mean, in the first chapter, there is discussion about, well, how do they fit together? Do they touch or not? If they touch, do they have parts or not? How does it work? Is there space in between them? Well, the Great Exposition sort of kind of leaves it at a certain point and just doesn't bother to go all the way through its analysis, because you don't have to if you want to achieve liberation from samsara. If you just want to become an arhat, you don't have to have the full understanding of emptiness. You have to have some degree of understanding of emptiness, but not the full. And so you go and you look at these and you realize that actually the Mahayanas, that they're empty, that actually you cannot, whether they're touching or not, whether there's a gap in between them or not, there's going to be parts to each of these particles. And so in this way, all of the different physical, the atoms, cannot exist on their own. So they are also emptiness. They're also basically, what do we say? They're imagined on the basis of smaller and smaller parts, and eventually you can't find anything. So they're all interdependent. They don't have substantial existence of their own. That's the difference. The Mahayana, the atoms do not have substantial existence, whereas in the Hinayana they do, or in the foundation vehicle they do. And then with the mind, when you're looking at the mental factors, like feelings or conceptions, or the other factors that are in the moment in the aggregate of formations, well, they are in the Great Exposition exist substantially for an infinitesimally short moment, the shortest indivisible moment. So it's so short that it kind of arises, remains, and perishes in the same moment. So then the question becomes, well, is the rising and perishing happening at the same time? Are they arising? How is it? And so actually, if you look at it, if it's arising and perishing, and like you're talking about the moment of the path of no obstacles, it arises and then it perishes, and it coexists with the afflictions, and then it perishes. Well, that's kind of like a beginning, middle, and end, isn't it? And then you can divide each beginning, middle, and end into a beginning, middle, and end, and so on ad infinitum. And so in this way, even those smallest moments of mind cannot be found to have substantial existence. So they're emptiness. So that emptiness is what the Mahayana is probably looking at. And this also applies to the fifth aggregate, the aggregate of consciousness. So all of these aggregates in the Mahayana are said to be empty. But understanding emptiness is actually not so easy, because it's easy to say, well, they don't have independent existence on their own. So you go to the point that we say, well, therefore they must not exist. But there's a problem there. So we actually experience them. We experience forms. We experience feelings. We experience conceptions. We experience the other mental factors. We experience our cognition. Well, whether we're aware of our experiences being experience of those depends on how kind of clear we are in our minds, but we can experience them. They appear. And at the same time as they appear, you can't find them. So how does that work? So this is like the big question of the Mahayana. What is the relationship of appearance to emptiness? So it's very easy at the beginning, especially when you read a lot of Madhyamaka texts, to say that, it's just saying there's none, there's nothing, there's nothing. There's that whole line in the Heart Sutra: no form, no feeling, no taste, no touch, no form, no feeling, no All right, no form, no sound, no scent, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, and so on and so forth. There's none of this, nothing, 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 nothing. And you begin to think that emptiness means nothingness, but it doesn't. Nothingness, you can only say that there's nothing if there's a thing. Nothing is dependent upon thing. If there's no thing, how can there be nothing? Like if you say, I mean, if rabbit horns don't exist, then what does it mean to say that there are no rabbit horns? It means nothing. It's like, of course there are no rabbit horns. If there are no sky flowers or anything, it's like, what does it say? It's actually meaningless. And so you begin by meditating upon the nothingness. And at the beginning, it's very common for people who start to study the Mahayanas to get into a little bit of a nihilistic sort of view, saying nothing, 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 nothing. But as Shantideva says in the ninth chapter of the ninth chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva, ingraining imprints of emptiness eliminates the what is it? Basically ingraining the influence or really meditating upon emptiness and ingraining that imprint of emptiness in your mind also helps you overcome the existence of, or the imprints of nothingness. So it's like you are burning a fire. This is another traditional explanation. You are burning the fire. You've got the firewood. The fuel is your attachment to things, and you burn it with your prajna. And at that point, it becomes nothing. But when the fuel has all burnt, there is no more flame. So there's no more thing. There is no more nothing. You use the idea of emptiness and non-existing to overcome any idea of existing. So as Shantideva says, and then when neither thing nor nothing remain before the mind, at that time there is no other way. At that time there is no other way. So there's no other way to think about it. Without a focus, utter peace. There's nothing. It's just complete peace. No ideas of existence, no ideas of non-existence. So things still appear, even though they're empty in the Mahayana. You've got that difference. So the Mahayana explanation of emptiness is very, very subtle, and it's very easy to misunderstand. It does not mean non-existence. It means, generally it's also said that it's saying that everything is interdependent. No real existence. Well, what does no real existence mean? So we can say it doesn't inherently exist, doesn't really exist, but what does that mean? This is what we have to look at in the Mahayana. So the reason why the Great Exposition is saying mostly no mind, that there's no mind found in the aggregates, and the reason why the Mahayana is saying that everything is emptiness, it's the union of emptiness and appearance. The reason why we have these two different presentations is, well, in the foundation vehicle, the main goal is arhatship. And to achieve arhatship, you need to eliminate, you can achieve that by eliminating the afflictions. Eliminating the afflictions is an incredibly impressive thing to do. So to achieve the level of arhatship is a really wonderful state. It's a great thing to achieve. In the Mahayana, the point is to overcome is to achieve Buddhahood. And so you have to achieve all of the dualistic, you have to overcome all of the dualistic thoughts that are the cognitive obscurations, as well as all their deepest imprints. It's not just enough to overcome dualistic thought. It's like even the slightest stain that it might have left in your being, in your continuum. And so for that reason, the explanations are looking at it on, we could say, a more profound level. But on this, so that's the main difference between them. You've got the difference in the motivation leads to the difference in the meditation that you do. So that's maybe, I don't know if that's a little bit more, but I see that there's another question that's come up. Well, it's actually a comment saying that these are, anyways. So I thank you all for your comments and questions. We will now dedicate the merit. Of course, there may be people who have questions about the Mahayana, and today I've kind of digressed a little bit further. I won't necessarily always deal with the questions about the Mahayana in depth because we're really speaking about the Great Exposition view. But if we want to understand the two, how do the two work together? The point is that you have to understand, if you really want to understand emptiness, you have to understand the Great Exposition presentation. Because when you get to the idea that this body is not a body, but it is these infinitesimally small atoms, even if you think that the atoms really exist, it's actually an incredibly profound understanding of what a body is. And it takes you a lot of the way towards emptiness. So you have to understand that. You have to understand the subtle permanence, the subtle impermanence of all phenomena if you're going to understand emptiness. These are really critical points. And where do you come to them? By studying this material first. So if you're going to understand the Mahayana, you have to understand this. Forget about understanding the meaning. If you even want to understand the words, if you look at the root stanzas of the middle way by Nagarjuna, do you want to understand what he's talking about? Study the Abhidharma first, because he's talking a lot about different things that we speak about in the Abhidharma. So if you want to understand the root stanzas, you've got to understand the Abhidharma. You've got to understand what he's talking about. So this is kind of fundamental material that we are covering in this class. So we will now dedicate the merit of listening to the Dharma. I'm not sure if rambling on like that is meritorious or not, but if it is, I will dedicate the merit anyways. In the case, it might just be me rambling on. So please dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings so that they may be freed from all levels of suffering. Osanam de Sepani Tomnenye Peranam Pamchete Keganachi Balong Chubai Sibetolero Kunurajosho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, and free all beings swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. May bodhicitta great and precious arise in those who have not roused it, never weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. Thank you very much.